geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans all over the world, gats and kittens, bonjour, mushy mushy, hola, v gates, how you doing? Welcome back to another thrill-packed, information-loaded, curiosity-satisfying episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And we have a special guest this week. Yeah, it's me. And I'm pushing my book, Guns of Mars. This is my take on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barzoom series. It takes place 1,000 years after the John Carter novels. Some people have called it a spaghetti western set on Mars, which is great because that's what I set out to write. So there you go. Hardcover, audio, Kindle, paperback coming soon for you cheapskates. No, I know. There's people that just like paperbacks. I dig it. I got a lot of paperbacks of my own. Way too many. Anyway, let's get to your questions. I don't want to waste another second of your precious time. So, boom. First up, Sean Fraser. I'll keep this short. What, in your view, is the appeal of the Western in media? Well, I mean, I love Westerns, and I think a lot of people love Westerns, and some people need to give Westerns a chance. But the appeal is like rugged individualism, generally, the lone hero. He's facing impossible odds. He's facing the bad guys. He's fighting against nature. He's got to get that serum through. He's running away from the posse, whatever. And I think largely the American Western, the Western represents, America's rugged individualism, our can-do attitude, our frontier spirit, which most of us don't really have anymore. But we had it, and we celebrate it, and it's a part of our national culture, even to this day, despite the many people trying to rewrite our national history. And I think that the appeal is, a guy making the rules. He's making the rules for himself, and he's making the rules for people around him. Most Westerns take place in in an atmosphere of lawlessness. There's, what you do is up to you. What happens in the West stays in the West. And I think people like that. They like that sense of freedom, and free from the constraints of society, on the wild edge of the Wild West. And that not only has an appeal to us here in the United States, but it's got a universal appeal. Westerns are popular throughout the world. And, we remember the Italian Westerns of the 60s and 70s. The Germans made a lot of Westerns. The Spanish made Westerns. Everybody seems to like Westerns. In Japan, the samurai movies are, the makers of samurai movies were heavily influenced, not only by their own culture, but by like the movies of John Ford. And samurai movies share a common element with Westerns, and that's why there's been so much cultural crossplay between samurai movies and Westerns. The thing they have in common is that all of the problems presented in the movie, all of the conflicts and complications are resolved in the end by violence. Shootouts, sword fights, fist fights, whatever. In the end of a Western, the cathartic moment is the good guy and the bad guys facing off against one another. And the thing about Westerns is the West of Hollywood, the Hollywood Western, the period we think of as a Western, is basically from the end of the Civil War to the beginning of World War I, if you include movies like The Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And it's not really that long a period of time. It's, 50, 60 years. And but a lot happens in that period. America's building a nation, and you have lots of different stories within the Western genre. You have the cavalry western, the railroad western, the town western, the man against nature western, westerns about the Indian Wars, westerns about outlaws, westerns about herding cattle, and the different county wars that happen between um, cattle barons and homesteaders, all these things. I mean, so the Western stretches from, Roy Rogers and Little House on the Prairie to Django and The Man with No Name, and serious Westerns like The Searchers, you know, and comedy Westerns, Dusty Rides Again, Cat Ballou, Blazing Saddles. These are all movies that play with the tropes of the Western because we're all familiar with them and have a lot of fun with them. But in the end, they're still Westerns. Even Blazing Saddles' complications are resolved through violence at the end in that wild free for all fight scene that closes out the movie. And so the appeal is there, and the thing is that westerns can be an allegory. Almost anything fits into a western. They can be an allegory about man's inhumanity to man, or the struggle of the individual. It was no secret in Hollywood that uh, particularly in the 50s, they were borrowing plot lines from ancient Greek dramas, things written by Euripides, thousands of years before, and they easily adapted to the Western because the Western, as I said, it contains all of these universal themes, and there's just something about that lone guy riding the range and what's going to happen next and what kind of problem he's going to have, what kind of problem is going to happen, uh, what's going to happen to him, you know, what comes next. So I think the Western is vital. As long as they make good ones, the Westerns will always be around. We're seeing a lot of Westerns made now. Most of them aren't very good, but some of them are excellent. So, and we're seeing Western television series and things like that. So the Western is far from dead. And I think that's because of that universal appeal. We all want to be a cowboy. Dara O'Sullivan. Will we ever get another Levon Cade novel, or is his story finished? Yeah, there are 12 novels so far. And I've been playing with a 13th novel for a while. And what was holding me up was I knew the story I wanted to tell, but I wasn't real sure how to get into it, how to get into that story. And recently I figured it out. I figured it out. I went by an old dictum that Larry Hama once told me: if you're hung up explaining everything, then don't explain anything. So that sort of helped me, give me a little boot in the butt to get going on another Levon Cade novel. And I have my opening sentences, which is a big thing to me. If I know my opening lines, I pretty much have set a line in the sand that I have to do it. Now I've promised you that I'm going to write another one, so I have to do it because I promised you. I have to do that. And we are talking, people are talking, and sometimes include me in the conversation, about a sequel to A Working Man, which would be a sequel. They would utilize the plot line of one of the other Levon Cade novels to create a sequel. And so that's kind of my deadline. I want to have another novel done before they begin principal photography. And knowing how slowly Hollywood moves, I got some time. but it is a deadline. So I'm finishing up. I know I've said this in 1,000 videos, maybe not 1,000, but a number of videos. I'm finishing up this Western. I got this third Western novel that I've got like 2 days of work on, and I just have to get back to it and finish it. And then after that, I don't really, other than vague ideas about other novels, I don't really have any novels in mind except another Levon Cade. So the next novel I write, which I'll probably start in like May, in April or May, I will start another Levon Cade novel. I do know the story I want to tell. Like I said, it's just a matter of figuring out how to get into the story in as entertaining a way as possible and not bore you, because that's what I fear. I fear boring you. Yeah, you listening, right? I don't want to bore you. I'm probably boring you right now. Twin spin. Dara O'Sullivan wins himself a twin spin, and he wants to know, I recently read and really enjoyed your novel Shrinkage. What was your inspiration for writing it? Shrinkage, if you don't know about it, it's a novel set in the 1970s in Philadelphia, and it's about a young man who is a shoplifter. And he decides it's Christmas time is coming. The crowds will be in the streets, then the stores. It's an excellent time for shoplifting because you can lose yourself in the crowd. And he decides that he really needs money bad, and he's going to become an inside man. So he takes a job at a big department store in Philadelphia and works from the inside to do his nefarious deeds as a petty thief. The inspiration, well, it's an Amazon, by the way. It is on Kindle. It is in print, in paperback, and it is an audiobook. So you can check that out. The inspiration was I wanted to write a gold medal paperback, like from the 50s or 60s. I wanted to write in that terse style, that sort of hard-boiled style. And it was a story I just wanted to get out of my system. And the inspiration comes from the fact that I worked in the early 70s, very early 70s, right out of high school. My first real job, I had a couple of dishwashing jobs, things like that. My first real job was working at John Wanamaker as a stock boy, much like the hero of my novel, or anti-hero of my novel, protagonist, as it were. I worked as a stock boy in the radio and television department on the 8th floor of the John Wanamaker building, the flagship store down there at 13th and Juniper, or 13th and Market, or 13th and Chestnut. The store took up a whole city block. Now, that may seem impressive if you're from New York City, but in Philadelphia, the blocks are shorter, which makes it a great walking city. To my mind, Philadelphia is the greatest walking city in the world, outside of perhaps Paris, but I've never been to Paris. The blocks are shorter than New York, where you have really, really deep, long blocks between the avenues. So it takes up a whole city, but it is a big building. It's 12 stories high. And I worked there for a couple of years, over a couple of Christmas seasons. And I'm going to say that some of the events, the novel is not autobiographical by any means, but some of the events in the novel did happen to me. Some of the things that occur in the novel, I will say I quote unquote participated in. I won't say which, but anyway, I wrote from experience. The novel isn't set at John Wanamaker. I made up a department store. But working at John Wanamaker was such a cool thing. If you're from Philadelphia, you know what I mean. Just an iconic store, iconic building, beautiful architecture. Building was opened, I think, in 1900. It was the grand opening was dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt came to the store. In the lobby, the famous courtyard of the Wanamaker building, there's a couple of little footprints, like golden footprints set in the tiles of the floor. And that's where Teddy Roosevelt stood when he cut the ribbon to open the store and gave an address to the, tumultuous crowd. I'm sure it was about commerce. The other cool things about the building, it's like a granite building. I mean, it is solid as a rock. I don't know what it is now. It is not a department store any longer. But one of the things about the buildings, it houses the world's largest pipe organ. This thing is a monster. The pipes run all the way up to the roof. And our stockroom on the 8th floor, we had a cabinet set in the wall that was locked. And in that cabinet were some of the pipe works. And when that guy got going on that pipe organ, our whole stockroom hummed. It's just an amazing. You could hear the thing breathing inside the walls. Just wild. Another cool thing about the building, I know I'm off on a tangent, but it's my show. When you're a stock boy at a major department store, at least this is the way when I did it. If you were sent on an errand within the store, that was basically your license to take an hour off. You just sort of go wander around. And I was taught this by some of the more experienced stock guys. It's like, when the sales guys, they send you on an errand, go here and get that, just disappear. Go down to the hot dog place on the mezzanine, get yourself a hot dog and a soda, you know, walk, just walk around, and when you get back, yeah, they'll yell at you, but what are they going to do? You're making minimum wage. Uh, so one day, me and another guy were sent up to the 12th floor, which I'd never been to. And the 12th floor was a big open area. It wasn't a retail level, it was mostly storage. And so there was like these cages of storage. And then one corner was the jewelry repair department. Two guys, working over a bench all day. And so while we were up there getting whatever it is we were supposed to get, we decided to kill some time by just looking around because we'd never been up there. And what we found two really cool things. One was a full-scale model of the John Wanamaker building made out of Legos. Now, this is 1972. Legos weren't a huge thing like they are now, but the Lego company had gifted this to Wanamaker. This thing was enormous. It must have been 10,000 bricks. It was enormous. And that was cool. But the even cooler thing was we saw a corner of a framed painting covered by tarps. And this painting was like 40 feet long by like 10 feet high. And it was an oil painting depicting all of the world's great conquerors from history. So you had Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Tamerlane, Genghis Khan, Suleiman, Alexander the Great. So you had all of these world conquerors. And we asked somebody about this. When we got downstairs, we asked an older employee, and he said that the painting used to hang in the mezzanine across from the organ. And you could see from the floor of the courtyard, you could see this painting because it was huge. The figures were more than life size on the painting. And they said it was taken down at the beginning of World War I because it was considered to be in poor taste because we were fighting the Kaiser and we didn't want to be promoting world conquerors at that point. And it was never hung again. And I'm sure at the beginning of World War II, even if they were considering hanging it, they thought twice. And it just, I'd love to know where that painting is today and know more of its history. But I got to see it. We uncovered it and took a good long look at it. And if we were carrying phones around on us like everyone does now, I'd have a picture of it, but I don't. I only have a picture in my mind. So anyway, that was the inspiration for Shrinkage. A lot of my own experiences working in the early 70s in a major urban department store. Triple spin. Dara wins the coveted triple spin with another question. I've read posts by people online who refuse to read any Asterix books published after the death of Rene Goscinny in 1977. Personally, I think these people are missing out. Some of the solo Uderzo books are among my favorite in the Asterix line, although in fairness, some of the later ones are not great. Have you read the post-Goscinny Asterix books? If so, then what are your thoughts on the Asterix books by Jean-Yves Ferry and Didier Conrad, published in the last decades? Yeah, I'm a big Asterix guy. I've read them all. I look forward to each one. I've reread and I've seen the movies, the silly movies they made. Big Asterix fan. I first heard of Asterix. I know you didn't ask where I heard of it, but again, it's my show. First heard of Asterix, I think it was in like junior high. And I saw an article, and I believe Comic Book Buyer's Guide about it. And I wanted to see this. The art looked gorgeous, even the crappy black and white art reproduced in the Buyer's Guide. And I wanted to see more of these guys. The art was beautiful. It was set in the Roman Empire, which I was fascinated with. Just looked like a whole lot of fun. And when I went to Germany on a high school trip in 1971, of course, I found Asterix, and I bought all the paperbacks in German. And I took German in high school for 4 years when my German was lousy, but I knew enough, or I'd learned enough that I could read it and make some sense of the story. And of course, these guys were great storytellers, so visually, I got the gist of what was going on. Uh, Now, in recent years, I've caught up with the ones by Conrad and Ferry, and these are post Cassini and Uderzo, post the original creators. And I gotta say, I enjoyed them. I look forward to the next one. The artwork, which is represented here, if you're watching this, is totally up to the standard set by Uderzo, and it's and the stories are good. They build upon the series. And the thing that I admire most about these new creators is they're able to uh, accomplish slapstick sequences, which doesn't seem like you can do that in a comic book. Uderzo was so good at it. Uh, and I mean slapstick series that aren't just, oh, that's clever. Slapstick series, physical comedy on a comic book page that would make you laugh. They were really good. It was like this comedic timing, even though it's in static images, and they always made me laugh. And these guys accomplished the same thing. And the stories are good, and they are loyal and faithful to the franchise. And in general, European comics are that way. When they reboot or bring on new creators or whatever, they make certain that the comics, the tone, the flavor, the characterizations remain consistent with what came before. Unlike American comics, where new creators feel like they have to throw everything away and reinvent everything, and to hell with what readers want or what longtime fans want. In France, even with recent Lucky Luke, or as my friend Jean-Francois insists I call him Lucky Luke, which is what they call him in France. Anyway, Lucky Luke, there's been some recent iterations where they don't draw it, they draw it somewhat more realistically, and there's more of a realistic elements to the story, but they still maintain the tone of the original series. They make more of a comedy western than a parody or pastiche, like most of the run of Lucky Luke has been. And the same here with Asterix. They really uh, pay homage, but come up with brand new material and brand new gags. They're not just repeating. So if you're one of those people that said, well, I'm not going to read these because the original creators are no longer with us, I think you're really missing out. And I don't think the original creators would be pleased that you're boycotting the series. But no, I enjoy them. Thanks for bringing that up. Alyssa Lopez, I wanted to ask you a question about the way you craft characters. Your work is a big inspiration to me. As a girl, I often find it difficult to write and find the voice of male characters. When reading your female characters, like the women of Birds of Prey, I'm always astonished by how real and three-dimensional the female characters feel. Do you struggle at all to get into the voice of a character of the opposite gender? Does your process differ depending on whether you're writing men versus women? I kind of made my bones writing strong female characters when I broke in. My first notice was for writing Airboy, but really it was Valkyrie. The character of Valkyrie people seem to be fascinated with, and really made that series click. Valkyrie was a terrific character. And of course, I've written tons of guys and all the negative male stereotypes there. But writing females, I credit it that I was raised with two older sisters. My sisters are 7 and 8 years older than me, so I was the pesky little brother. I was the fly on the wall. I was very observant as a child, and still am. I guess that's why I'm a writer. And I would just watch them, what they were doing. And I thought my sisters were really cool. And they were Catholic schoolgirls, if you know what that means. And they were tough, but they're real tough, but they were feminine as well. And I was sort of like exposed to their world because we all lived in a house that was like, 1,000 square feet. So, there was no escaping each other. So I'm sort of part of their world. I hear them talking to each other and their friends and talking on the phone and their problems with boys and their problems at school and everything else, and sort of get an idea, sort of soaking in how females interact with each other. And now the famous Jack Nicholson quote, where he plays a writer and someone asks him how he writes convincing female characters, and he says, I write a man and then I remove reason and accountability. That's simply not fair. Women are different than men. I don't want to shock you with that one, but they are. And a lot of it has to do with hormones. As my wife says, hormones make the world go round. Hormones make us who we are. They contribute to our decision making, our personalities, and everything else. And the thing about women is their brains are different than men's in a good way. We have the left and right hemisphere of the brain. In between them is this gap called the corpus callosum. And in women, their corpus callosum is wider. And I've explained this before in videos, but I'm explaining it again for anybody who hasn't heard this. And it's not a theory, this is real. The corpus callosum is wider. And so a woman's brain, left and right side, can operate almost independent of one another. So that when a woman gets emotional, she's still able to reason. This is why men can never win an argument with a woman, because men, their corpus callosum is very narrow. And so one side of the brain takes over or the other. So when a man gets emotional, gets in an argument, he doesn't have any, his intellect is not working as it should. And a woman still is. She's still firing on all 8 cylinders. She's able to say, well, I know that you did that because I remember that day and you were wearing that blue shirt and it rained in the afternoon. And a man's comeback is, well, your mother's ugly. Because the guy, he's in flux. He's got, he's angry, he's this, he's that, and he's not thinking anymore. And that's the power that women have. And I treat it that way. I always say women are more emotional, and it's not really true. It's not really true, because they can be emotional and still be acting effectively. The other thing about women is different than men is men tend to not examine relationships. Women constantly examine their relationships with their relatives, with their friends. It's always, what did she mean by that? Or what did he mean by that? So women are always looking at angles, and men don't do that. I mean, you can ask a guy, why are you friends with that guy? He's a slob. He's a jerk. He's always borrowing money from you. And it's like, well, we were on the same little league team once. And that's enough for a guy. But women, it's not, they need a constant test of loyalty. They're always testing relationships. And that's, that serves as a function, I guess, as a security function. Who knows? All of this goes back to when we were, naked and running around in nature, hoping something wouldn't eat us, or our fellow human beings wouldn't club us in the head and take everything that belongs to us. So I think a lot of these are survival mechanisms. Women, back in those days, if they got frightened, couldn't afford to become hysterical, and they had to fight or flee, so they had to stay reasoning. Whereas men, in a situation like that, they would draw on rage, and they didn't need to be thinking anymore. The other difference, and generally men, not only do they not examine their own relationships with their friends, family, whatever, they generally don't care what anybody thinks at any given time. They don't care what people think about them. And women always care. They will care about how they look. They care about what people are thinking. They're more easily embarrassed, things like that. And those are just things to remember. So, I mean, I didn't really learn to write about women. I just intuited it from spending time around my sisters. And I think, we had, I mean, the only real male figure in my family was my dad. I never met my granddads either side, but, I knew my grandmother and great aunts. And so it was mostly, except for an uncle, it was mostly women in my family. And so, a lot of time to observe you chicks, see what you're up to. And I think that's it. I mean, It's not like I set out or I did a lot of thinking. It's a lot of intuiting. Hey, I got more to say, but brunobookstore@gmail.com is where you should be sending your questions, suggestions, whatnot. If you want to reach me, this is the most reliable way, brunobookstore@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions. I love them. And let's get to another one right now. Jameson McCran. This is going to be, he's taking the podium. Okay. He says, is there a better way for a writer to ask themselves, is there a better way to say this? I already had this question as a consideration before learning it's one of your suggested writing maxims, but this could just be me. I've always found it to be an anxious question, leading to over-explanation and endless revision, which in turn makes for an even more verbose result. The irony is that this happens in a quest for maximum context and clarity. What is it that you're actually measuring and analyzing when you ask yourself, is there a better way to say this? Are there rules of thumb about what can be parsed down without the reader losing crucial exposition and individual character personality versus indulgent world building and clever dialogue? How do you know when you've gone too far in your pursuit of lean, muscular writing to the point of losing your voice and panache? Even as an invisible hand writer, ought that aspect not be present lest there be a dull technical outcome? Well, generally, when I ask myself, is there a better way to say this? My tendency is toward terse dialogue and terse descriptions, brevity, and mostly I learned that because of working in comics. In comics, you know, there shouldn't be lots and lots of room for lots and lots of verbiage because it's a visually told medium. It's a combination of words and pictures. So you want to keep your dialogue and your captions to as, short as possible. You want to convey things with punch and get your ideas across. So you're working broad. You're working broadly. There's not a lot of room for subtlety in comics. So you kind of learn to get your ideas across, but you got to get them across in an interesting way. And largely what you want to do in dialogue, let's just talk dialogue, because you can be Tolkien and spend 4 pages describing a tree if that's what you want to do. And if you're writing fantasy, the readers are fine with that, apparently. Verbose is fine. But if you're writing crime fiction, thrillers, and you want to keep your story moving along, you want your writing to be more elegant. Paint a picture in the reader's mind with as few words as possible, with the most evocative words you can come up with. So you want to look through that and make sure that your descriptive prose isn't dull. That there's something going on there. As far as dialogue goes, the thing you want to stay away from, and the question, and why I ask myself this question, is there a better way to say this? Is there a better way for my character to say this? Is you want to avoid references to plot in your story. You don't ever want a character directly refer to the plot, to directly refer to what's going on. Like, we got to rob this bank because I really need the money for my sister's eye operation. You never want a character to say that. You never want a character to say, this is what we're going to do, and then lay out the plan. Not directly, and then refer again and again to the plan. Remember, this is the part I told you about before. You don't want to do that. You don't want to we have to make it through the snowy pass or we're all going to starve to death. You don't want to be that direct. You never want to be that on the nose. You want to be more artful, and you want your dialogue to resonate better. Now, I'm going to bring up Red River. Now, if you've watched a lot of these videos, you're like, oh, God, Chuck, you going to bring this up again? Red River, you going to bring up this scene from Red River? Yes, I am, because it demonstrates perfectly what I'm talking about when you say, is there a better way to say this? Now, Red River is a John Wayne Western directed by Howard Hawks, co-starring Walter Brennan, Montgomery Clift, John Ireland, great cast. And in the story, they send John Ireland and Noah Berry Jr. character away on an errand. Okay. And only Noah Berry returns. And Montgomery Clift wants to know, where is John Ireland? You know, why'd you come back by yourself? And so he asks Buster, where's Cherry? Cherry Valance, the John Ireland character. And Buster says, Cherry, well, he figured there was no need two of us coming. One was, and he kind of trails off. And Montgomery Clift says, is she pretty? And Buster says, oh, Matt, do you remember that little filly I used to own? And Montgomery Clift says, that's what I thought. Now, he could have just said, hey, he met a girl. You know, hey, you know, Cherry got horny and stayed behind, you know, to hang out with his girl for a while. But that would be too on the nose. That would be too much a reference to plot. Let's go back. Buster, where's Cherry? And he's like, Buster, you know, you can see in these words, he is loath to explain too much. He's doesn't want to get Cherry in trouble. But you know, the Montgomery Clift character knows Cherry real well and knows the most possible reason is she pretty? And that tells us all that tells us, you know, a lot. This guy, he knows him well enough to know the reason why he's not there. And then Buster's answer isn't direct. It's not like, yeah, she's gorgeous. You know, she had legs up to the sky. And he couldn't walk away. No, he just says, do you remember that little filly I used to own? Now, this not only is a great way of evoking what happened, why Cherry isn't there, it also lets us know that Buster and Matthew, the character in this scene, have a long history, a shared history together. They've hung out. They've been on cattle drives. They've been hunting strays. They've been breaking horses. And Buster uses this as instead of going into long descriptions or anything like that, it uses this, and so it accomplishes two things. And then you know, Matthew acknowledges, yeah, that's what I thought. And that's, you know, that's what you want to aim for. You don't want your characters, you know, I mean, you, me, and everybody else, we talk about the plot of our lives. You know, I'm going to the store and I might stop by the dry cleaners later. You know, you know, we need to do that. But in a story, you don't want characters saying that, unless, of course, they get to the dry cleaners and it's attacked by terrorists. But you want to stay away from on-the-nose dialogue. And you definitely want to stay away from characters describing their feelings, describing their emotions, because you want to be able to see that. You want to be able to see those things, not have them tell you. In fact, many times, the most effective thing, if you have a character who's emotional, is to have them deny their emotions. You know, no, I'm fine. You know, I'm not sad. You know, or totally deflect. If you notice in really good movie dialogue and really good TV series dialogue, characters very, very rarely directly answer a question. They answer, it's a non sequitur, or they answer with another question and everything else. And the reason for this is because generally the audience already knows the answer to that question and they don't need it answered by the character. They already know it. And so the dialogue can move on more briskly by cutting out those parts of the exchanges. Never tell your reader or viewer or whatever, never tell them what they already know. Okay, we've already seen that. We already know he buried her in the backyard in a steamer trunk. He doesn't need to tell you he did that. So that when the police are interrogating him, he just says, you know, well, you know, she wanted it that way, you know, or she wouldn't listen, you know, and we've all seen this, and particularly in police interrogation scenes where the character just never answers directly because we already know. We've already saw it, so we don't need to be told. So that's what I mean by, is there a better way to say this? It's not meant to make you second guess yourself. It's basically a way to make you have a second pass. I mean, yeah, you're second guessing yourself, but not really. It's just, you're just reconsidering what you already wrote. Okay. And this shouldn't stop you from writing. I mean, I think if you have a tendency toward verbosity, but you don't want, just write the verbosity. You can always go back and trim it out. You can always go back and you'll know if it's clear or not, or if you're cutting out important information. And as I said, your important information shouldn't be in the dialogue anyway. You know, you should avoid that as much as possible. You should show, particularly in comics, particularly in film, you should show the reader, not tell them about it. There's a sequence I have in mind. I think in the next video, I'm going to talk about this sequence that I saw in a TV movie many, many, many years ago that perfectly demonstrates what I'm talking about. But I won't do it now. There's a teaser for you. Hey, twin spin. They're flying out of the woodwork today. Okay, Jameson McCran is back with, I recently acquired a copy of Radio Boy from you after being so curious to read a copy after you mentioned it. I have the same question after reading it as I did before. Why have you never embraced or pursued development in becoming a cartoonist? We all know you can write, and your pontifications on speaking the language of the medium indicate that you could pull off serviceable layouts at minimum. Here is a competently penciled story, a parody of its time, yes, and inked by someone else, yes, but a demonstration nonetheless. Will we ever see more dual threat Dixon? Yeah, Radio Boy is a comic I did back toward the end of the black and white glut of the 1980s. The Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles kicked off a craze for black and white comics. And of course, independent publishers loved them because they were so much easier and cheaper to print. And you could still charge the same price as a color comic. And I jumped in with Radio Boy. It was a one-shot. It was all written by me with a lead feature, penciled by me, and inked by the amazing Jim Engel, just a master cartoonist of the old school. Jim was a longtime friend from back when we both used to contribute to fanzines in the early 70s. And he jumped on this with great enthusiasm and really saved my life. As Jim kindly refers to my artwork, he said my pencils were very geometric in nature, but he gave them form and substance and drop shadows and all the things that a great inker should do and does do. So I did this one shot. It had a couple of backup stories drawn by Flint Henry. And it was a satire on manga comics, obviously. This being Astro Boy, we did I think a Fist of the North Star kind of satire and a giant robot satire as backups. And it was just a one shot, and but it sold really well. It was the biggest check I had seen up to this point in comics when Dean paid me the royalties. And the deal with Eclipse was if you provided the content, Dean and Eclipse Comics would split the profits 50-50. So this book did really well. It did really well. And I was able to pay everybody and I think pay out some bonuses because the check was pretty fat. It was a check I wouldn't mind getting today. But, you know, it was fun to work on and everything else. But it is that rare example of my penciling a comic. And like almost every other comic book writer, I set out to be an artist because I love the art. It's the first attraction to comics is, you know, the art. I'm loving Steve Ditko and Wally Wood and Jack Kirby, and boy, I want to be like them, but I didn't have the talent. So I worked out a sort of idiosyncratic cartooning style, and I worked from that. But I didn't have the discipline, the patience, and quite honestly, it's my biggest regret, if I had a regret about my career, is that I didn't stay in art school longer. Well, I never really went to art school. I went to community college and took a bunch of life drawing courses, but I didn't stay with that long enough. to really um, harness the skills, really learn the skills. I never learned to ink. I'm a terrible at it. But learn about largely how to make characters consistent, drawing model sheets. I just learning the craft of cartooning, the basics of cartooning, and I really kind of wish I had done that, so I would be a dual threat and be able to illustrate some of the goofier stories that I've come up with. But I was just a young kid with a dream back then, and I had to work. Certainly didn't have money for art school, which is no excuse. I should have pestered like pros I met and stuff like that for advice, but I didn't. And every once in a while on Facebook, I will be self-effacing about my cartooning abilities, and invariably, Jim Engel will show up to chastise me and say, "No, you are a cartoonist." But I'll never be the cartoonist that he is. And I stand in awe of animators and anybody that can draw consistent cartoon characters. I mean, Scott Adams. I mean, the characters are consistent. I mean, as simple as they were, and I never developed the ability to do that, and I kind of wish I had. But I'm glad you checked out Radio Boy. I hope it made you laugh. That was the idea. Very very silly book. Here's an aside. Um, I actually optioned that to Rankin Bass twice. The option ran out, and they optioned it again. They were going to make a television series out of Radio Boy, and I said to them, it is a parody. It's not meant to be like a serious superhero comic. I'm making I'm not making fun of. I'm having fun with Astro Boy, and they didn't care. So I thought this is weird because Rankin Bass, their stuff was animated in Japan. I thought, what are the Japanese animators going to think of this? I'm sort of mocking Osamu Tezuka's creation, uh, but and the central gag, if you've never read Airboy, the central gag is that these imitation mangas are appearing for the first time from their creator, and the creator's name was Hawaii Nice to Meet You. That was a name Jim Engel came up with, and Hawaii Nice to Meet You in our fictional world. He insists on translating the comics himself, and his English wasn't very good, and that's the central gag of Radio Boy. And going even further off on a tangent, because once again it's my show. When I was working with Bongo Comics on The Simpsons, I was talking one day to Terry Delagene, one of their editors, and he was talking about a softball game. They were doing a softball game this afternoon, and he goes, this sounds kind of silly, but in our softball game, for some reason, we all like to joke around using like broken English from this comic that we read a bunch of years ago. And we all start talking like the characters in that comic. And I said, well, which comic is that? And he goes, it was called Radio Boy. You probably never heard of it. I was like, yeah, Radio Boy. That's me. I didn't sign the book. The book was signed by Hawaii Nice to Meet You. So there you go. Lots of tangents this week. Why not? Okay, David Jordan, he wants to know, I'd like to hear your opinion on this movie. It seems like everyone got to put their own gags in and none of them worked. The director seemingly refused to cut anything, no matter how tedious and unfunny. There's some great budget visuals, sets, costumes. He's talking about Casino Royale, by the way. I don't know why I cut that out of the question. He's talking about the 1965 movie, Casino Royale. Because there were some great big budget visuals, sets, costumes, though that seemed like they were inspired by stuff like the Avengers and the Prisoner. As far as a spoof, comma, we like commas. Our man Flint did it infinitely better the year before. Yeah, Casino Royale was like, what the hell was Casino Royale? Apparently, these filmmakers got the rights to a remake of a TV movie of Casino Royale, which I believe is the first James Bond novel. and they made this ridiculous 1960s farce where a number of different actors played James Bond, and it makes absolutely no sense. And they waste this amazing cast. You've got Peter Sellers, Ursula Andress, David Niven, Woody Allen, Joanna Pettit, Orson Welles. You've got Deborah Carr, William Holden, Charles Boyer, Jean-Paul Belmondo in his only non-French made film, George Raft, John Huston. And the movie is an unwatchable mess. Yes, it is a beautifully shot film. They spent a fortune on this thing. It didn't make a dime at the box office. Why you would take a Bond story and do this to it? Why you just wouldn't cast your own Bond and counter program against the Broccoli and Saltzman productions? I have no idea, because this was at the height of Bond mania, and they just sort of blew it. And I've tried to watch this movie over and over and over again, but I can't. I can't get past like the first 20 minutes because it's just a tedious mess that absolutely makes no sense. And even though it's got some of my favorite people in it, and you know, including Peter Sellers and you know, the rest of the cast, I don't get it. I will never get it, and I can't. I always want to watch until the point Woody Allen's in it, and especially I want to watch until Jean-Paul Belmondo's in it. I have no idea what Jean-Paul Belmondo does in this movie because I never made it that far. So yeah, just a waste of time for all concerned. And now a bunch of you are probably real curious and want to see it. Maybe I'll try to watch it again in like 15-minute increments just to get to the end and see, you know, try to figure out what the hell they were thinking of when they made this. Now you're absolutely right that, you know, the In Like Flint or Our Man Flint, the series with James Coburn did a better job of making fun of the spy genre. Although even them are they are, boy, they are so 60s, these movies, super 60s, but you know, fun. There's some great fight scenes and everything else. So you've got everything you wanted to have in a spy movie, but it's funny as well. And then I gotta stick up for my main man Maxwell Smart. Get Smart was the ultimate spy spoof. I watched this show religiously as a kid. I read the paperback novels. I just loved this show when I was a kid. Never missed it, and it still holds up. Still a funny show. So there you go. Agent 86 and 99. Shout out. And then recently, more recently, Jean Dujardin has made 3 films of OSS 117, a casually racist, misogynistic, sexist spy character. The stories are set in the 50s and 60s, and firmly set. These are French language films, and they're based on a series of French movies made in the 60s that were serious spy movies, with serious French James Bond kind of thing, featuring OSS 117. And but these movies are hysterically funny. Jardine is terrific in them. So these are good spy spoofs if you've never seen them, and I think a bunch of them are available on streaming. So hey, I got a correction to make. You people call me out, and you're right. You called me out on this one, and I concede. Last week, someone asked me about the best novelist that ever wrote comics, and I said Mickey Spillane. A little tongue in cheek, but also serious. I thought Mickey Spillane was a good comic book writer and a good novelist, no matter what you think of him. And a bunch of you called me out and said, "Hey, wait a minute. What about Edmund Hamilton? Edmund Hamilton, long time Superman scripter, long time Superman writer, who was science fiction, pulp science fiction writer as well." And I'm like, "Yeah, yep, good novelist." When I was in junior high, I read a bunch of his Captain Future novels, which were republished in paperback. Read a whole bunch of them, really enjoyed them. And he was married to Lee Brackett, the legendary pulp sci-fi hard-boiled crime and screenwriter. And Hamilton Superman stories are always fun, always entertaining. So yeah, you're right. Edmund Hamilton. Another one you called me out on was Alfred Bester. Alfred Bester wrote Golden Age Green Lantern stories. Yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good for Golden Age stories. They're pretty good. And he also went on to write novels like The Star Is My Destination and The Demolished Man. And these were very influential. He sort of breathed a lot of new life. I read Demolished Man, back in the day, and really dug it. And Star Is My Destination, all the rest. He sort of was the herald for writing science fiction in like a new, fresher, more revolutionary way, which led to guys like Harlan Ellison and Robert Sheckley and guys like that. So yeah, I'm going to give you that, Alfred Best. Now, one I'm going to throw in because you sparked my memory on this. Otto Binder, who was a longtime pulp science fiction writer, very prolific in Amazing and Astounding and magazines like that, who went on to not only edit and write uh, Captain Marvel's greatest adventures back in the Fawcett days, but he transferred over to DC and was a contributor to many, many great Superman stories in the 50s. So hats off to, and I think into the 60s. So yeah, these science fiction guys moved over to comics from the science fiction pulps pretty easily and did terrific work. So so there you have it. There you have it. Now, since I'm selling stuff, uh, please take a look at the link is below at Seven Deadly Sinners, the 1970s retro grindhouse outlaw biker epic, 120-page graphic novel by me and another master cartoonist, Bob C. Harden. This is R-rated, or as I like to say, 1970s PG. It's violent. It's got hot chicks, hot bikes, white hot action. Uh, you know, Knife fights, fist fights, chases, gunfights, punch outs. Everything you want in an outlaw biker epic is here. And please go check it out. The campaign runs through March 27th, and I would really appreciate your participation. You will not be sorry. We worked so darn hard on this thing, and it's from our good friends at Ripasend. So that is it for this week. Thank you for liking, or watching, and listening. If that's what you did, thanks for your awesome questions. And I will see all of you, I hope, down the road.